So we are in Numbers, and we're going to skip 12 for now, and we'll come back to it. We're in Numbers 13. We're in the desert. Okay, so remember now, between Numbers 1 and Numbers 10 is 20 days long. They're ready to go to the Promised Land. I just love the people here. This sets up the stage for the whole book. Okay, remember the Hebrew title for Numbers is in the desert, in the wilderness. And that applies to all of us because we've all been in the desert at one time or another. And so we get to Numbers chapter 10, and it's time to go. The pillar of cloud lifts, and off they go. So in chapter 10, verse 33, so they set out from the mountain of the Lord and traveled for 3 days, and then they rested. Chapter 11, verse 1, and the people complained. I just love that. It's like being a pastor. The people complain. They start complaining right away. It's only been 3 days, and they're complaining. Okay? And so we get to look at this journey of how the Lord interacts with them every step of the way in their complaints and what's going on and how He responds to them. So why are they complaining? So today we're in this particular chapter. It's a well-known chapter, at least the overall story. This is the chapter where they send out the 12 scouts to go check out the Promised Land and come back and give a report. Okay, you know the story. You know the surface level of the story, right? They come back and they give a terrible report and they decide not to go into the land, and now they have to wander for 40 years because of it. So the theme of Numbers is actually pretty easy. The desert has sand and the Lord has patience. Okay, they say, no, we're not going to go. He goes, all right, fine, start wandering. Oh, wait, we're going to go. No, you're not going to go. You're going to wander for 40 years. And if the second generation had not gone on, he'd say, fine, get back out to the desert and wander for 40 more years. If the third generation had done that, fine, the desert has a lot of sand. And God's very patient. He's not in a hurry. So we're going to learn some things today by looking in more detail at some of the specifics, because there are things in here that you've probably glossed over in your reading if you have read it. And there's little details that really highlight who these people, what kind of people they really are. So I had Rachel read John 13. Okay, how can you tell a true believer? It's not by their words, believe it or not. You know what's interesting? This conference that I'm at, I go every year and speak at it. This is our fourth one. Like I said, we had just a whole auditorium packed with women. Some of them are pastors, preachers, teachers. Some of them want to learn more about the Bible. So Lisa has arranged a whole lineup of well-known scholars, okay? That's not me, by the way. These are all that have published lots and lots of books. And so they're all lined up, all these PhDs that they love the Lord. They just love the Lord. And they're all specialists in their own area. And they can't wait to get up there and share about that. And so the purpose of the conference is to help all these 1,000 or more women to learn more about Bible study and how to do it. And some of them are going to seminary. One lady walked up to me and said, "Hi, Dr. Howard. I'm your student this coming month in June and July." "Oh, you're in the doctoral program at Denver Seminary." "I am." So I bet one of my students already. We haven't even started yet. So there's a variety of experience there. But we talk, what's amazing about this conference? Okay, ready for this? Every year, we have a pastor come to the Lord. Let me say that again, because I really want to make sure you get it. Every year, we have a pastor come to the Lord. Makes you wonder how many pastors there are out there that don't know the Lord yet. I can assure you there's a lot. Okay? I follow all the threads of the pastors that are falling due to sexual sin, and some of the things that these pastors have done, I mean, I'm not God, but I just cannot in any way figure out how they're redeemed because of the evil that they have perpetrated on children, for example. So I can assure you there's pastors out there that pretend. And it makes me wonder, every pastor, we talk about this in the classroom, how many of my own church, I ask them, how many of your own church do you think are true believers? Okay? I mean, Jesus gives a lot of warnings in Matthew. On that day, Lord, Lord, Didn't we prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name? He'll say, away from me, I never knew you. Never had a relationship with you. And I witness this at this conference every year. At least one pastor and another Christian leader come to the Lord. And for the first time, they really believe. It's astonishing, isn't it? We can pretend, can't we? So, how can you tell a true believer? Jesus said you'll know them by their fruit. Or in John 13, by this everyone will know that you are my disciples if you prophesy in my name. Oh, no, that's not it. If you do miracles in my name, that's not it. If you stand up and preach the finest sermons in my name, that's not it either. No. If you defend Christianity, no, that's not it either. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. It's a pretty simple test. All right? So let's begin by asking this. What kind of faith do you have? Because that's at the heart of this story right here. What kind of faith do you have? Is it a real faith? I used to, many, many years ago, ask people, when did you become a Christian? And I quit asking that question because people can say, well, I came to faith on this day, or I prayed a prayer this day, or I went forward on this day. And it's like, I no longer care about that. Now I ask the question, when did your faith become real? How would you answer that? When did your faith become real? Do you even have a real faith, or is it a shallow faith? Is it a non-existent faith? I can't answer the question. I have to wrestle with my own conscience. I can't answer yours. But when did your faith become real? Is it real? Okay, so they're entering the promised land now from the southern border. Okay? They're coming up from the region of Sinai, the desert, the wilderness. And they've had a little bit of experience in the wilderness. They had the beginning experience when they came out of Egypt for a few days, where God took them to a place where there was no food, nothing to drink. And we talked about that when we were in Exodus. Why would he do that? It's only an 11-day walk. You can walk from where they were to the promised land in about 11 days. But he didn't take them up along the Mediterranean. He took them southeast into the desert, where we learn later there's a lot of scorpions and snakes. There's no food, no water, none of that stuff. It's hot. Why did he take them there? Remember, they do not yet know this God. They've seen his power through the 10 plagues. They watched him demolish the plagues of the gods of Egypt. And so he has to teach them the right questions to ask. The right questions. I've shared this before, but when I was in India 3 weeks ago, we were talking about it. Almost all my students are Hindu converts. Why do you go to the temple? I've never seen a happy Hindu in a temple. Why do you go to the temple? And they were honest. They said, because of fear. Fear. Why? We go to the temple to offer sacrifices just so the gods won't be angry at us. That's why they go. They don't know to ask the question, because they've come out of Egypt, is this a good God? They don't even know to ask that, because that's not part of any of the ancient nations. They wanted to appease the gods, not emulate them. Just keep the gods off their backs, because the gods get angry like that. And so God takes them to a place where they don't have water, so he can show them, let me take care of you. He takes them to a place where there's no food, so he can show them, I'll take care of you. And they have to begin to learn. Then they spend 13 months sitting there learning about through Leviticus and what God desires, and he begins to redefine everything through the Mosaic Law. Remember what the purpose of the Mosaic Law is, okay? There's many purposes that's scattered throughout there. Paul Wardlaw has helped me to think through the kind of the hygiene issues. There are some of that where there's hygiene issues, but it's about dignity. It's about dignity at every level. The righteous person cares for their animals. Animals have dignity. Okay? When you go into the land, don't cut down the trees. Wait a year before you use the fruit. Every so often, let the land rest. 7 years. Let it rest. Everything in creation has dignity, and the fall robbed us of that dignity. And so the Mosaic Law is restoring that dignity at every level. Okay? One of the consequences of the fall was a power imbalance. Okay? I hate the language, but we often refer to it as patriarchy. That has so much negative stuff. But honestly, the men had power over the women and the children and the slaves and the foreigners and everybody else. And so what the Mosaic Law does, it's different from the other ancient law codes, is that the ancient law codes protected the men, those in power, I should say. And what the Mosaic Law does is it protects those not in power. So it protects the women. We looked at that in Numbers 5 just a few weeks ago. Okay? It protects those women who've been sexually abused. It protects children. It protects foreigners. It protects slaves. It protects everything of those not in power, and it controls those in power. It even protects criminals who have lost their rights. Deuteronomy 25. You know, everything's now adjudicated. You can't just enact vengeance. No, you can't beat your wife. You could in Egypt, but not here, not in our land. So the Mosaic Law changes world history in every way you can imagine, because it's beginning to put in place the things that are going to point us to Christ. We take care of the women. We take care of the children, the foreigners, right? We don't abuse people. We don't. We love them and care for them. We don't abuse creation. We let it rest. We take care of it. We don't abuse our animals. We take care of them. All right? Even the Passover, you see that beginning to occur. He says, take a little lamb, a little ewe lamb, a little baby. Bring it into your house for 3 days and then kill it. Okay, so some of you have children. What would happen if you bring a little tiny lamb into your home for 3 days with your children? They're starting to learn about dignity and sacrifice and the cost of sin by doing that. So that's what the Mosaic Law is doing. So they've got 13 months hearing all this, and he says, okay, it's time to go to the promised land now. You're now a nation. I've taught you all this. And what do? They complain. Okay? They complain. Why? Okay, it's easy to be judgmental. It's very easy. I have a whole lot of respect for these slaves. I have a whole lot of respect for these Israelites trying to figure out this. I look at us. We complain, don't we? When things don't go our way, don't we complain? How many of you complain? Let me see. How many of you are lying? Those are the ones that didn't raise your hand. It's a picture of who we are. And so we should be careful before we castigate them, before we do too much judgment on them. But let's look at the question of why they're doing what they're doing. So Numbers 13, the first 2 verses, the Lord said to Moses, send some men to explore the land. When you look at Deuteronomy and he's reflecting on this, he sent the chieftains. So he sent the leaders of each of the tribes to go explore the land. These are the trusted people, okay? Send them to explore the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites. Okay, now pause. You got to wrestle with some of these tough passages. I am giving it to the Israelites. Who owns the land? Is it the Canaanites? No. It's not. Is it the Amalekites, the Hittites, the Amorites? No. God owns it. And I decided to give it to my people. That means we got a mess ahead of us on how we're going to deal with the people that live there. But that's God's decision. He said, from each ancestral tribe, send one of its leaders. So at God's command, Moses sent them out from the desert of Paran. When you go down through the next bunch of verses, it's all the leaders. Shows you that they did what he said. So their itinerary, he tells them where to go. When you look in verse 22 of chapter 13, you see something pretty interesting. They went up through the Negev and came to Hebron. Hebron, that's a special place. That's where Sarah was buried, Abraham was buried, and Jacob was buried. Okay, when you go back over 400 years, okay, God says to Abram, I'm going to give you all this land. And Abraham says, how do I know that that's true? That was a very common thing to do, to ask for some kind of, how do I know you love me? I'm going to give you a wedding ring. Oh, we do it. How do I know this? How do I know that you're going to sell me your car? I'll give you a contract. Well, he says to God, how do I know it's true? And God says, I'm going to send your people out of this land for 400 and something years. Okay? They'll be mistreated, but don't worry about it. I'll rescue them, bring them back. And Abraham's like, okay, why? And he says, because the sin of the Amorites or the Canaanites has not reached its full. They haven't made a decision yet. And so I'm going to be very patient with them and give them 4 centuries to make that decision. So Abraham buys a grave here. He and Sarah buried here. Jacob's buried here. Remember Melchizedek, who goes out and thanks him and wants to give him money. And he says, no, I don't need your money. It's okay. All right? So these people in the land at this time, 400 years earlier, are now wrestling with this idea of who is this God that is beginning to appear to these people. So then he brings them out of Egypt. 400 and something years later. In the next version of, the next time they send tribe, we'll get there, send scouts in. Do you know what Joshua says? We should go into the land because God has lifted his protection. They made their decision. They decided they're not going to trust this God. They're going to go after their own gods. They've made their decision. Their time is up. So God says, okay, I will give them this land. So they go right there, and this is a symbol right there at Hebron of the cave where Abraham was. It's a promise. He's fulfilling it. The people, the nation is growing now, and they're going into the land. And it's also a reflection that the people of the land, their time is up. God does have a line in the sand. He does. And we see it here. So they gather fruit. It's beyond their wildest dreams. Numbers 13, verse 23. So when they reached the valley of Eshcol, they cut off a branch bearing a single cluster of grapes. 2 of them carried it on a pole between them, along with some pomegranates and figs. That's how big the grapes were. They had to carry it on the pole. That's pretty amazing. That place was called the Valley of Eshcol. Eshcol is a Hebrew word for big cluster. Okay? And so they named it that. Wow, look at these grapes. And so it's beyond their wildest dreams how much stuff there is here. Remember what he said, it's a land flowing with milk and honey. Okay, the milk is talking about the wildlife, the crops, the goats and the cows, and the honey is talking about the agricultural side. In other words, it's a fantastic land. He said when you go into the land, you're not going to have to build houses. They're already built for you. You're not going to have to plant vineyards. They're already planted. You're not going to have to corral crops. Animals. The crops are already there waiting for you. I'm taking them away from the people in the land and giving them to you. Because that's my decision and my choice. I own everything. Doesn't the psalmist tell us this? The earth is the Lord's and everything in it. So he makes a decision to take it away from this people group and give it to this people group. And that's what he's doing. So this is a land flowing with milk and honey. But their report begins to go sideways. Okay? That's why I called this sermon Trouble in Paradise. Because it bypasses the blessings and moves to an area that Moses wasn't interested in. The human demographics. He didn't care about that because he knows who God is. So his instructions are very careful in verse 17. When Moses sent them to explore Canaan, he said, go through the Nev and get to the hill country. Okay, go to the hill country. We know from archaeology that the hill country at this time had very few settlements in it. Okay? It wasn't like it was filled, the land was filled. It had very few settlements in this era, the late Bronze Age. There just weren't that many people there. So Moses says, go to that area, but they don't listen to him. They go further. Verse 29, when they're giving their report, they say, the Amalekites live in the Negev, the Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites live in the hill country, the Canaanites live near the sea and along the Jordan. They're beginning to paint a picture that there's people everywhere. And that's simply not the truth. We now know that. Okay? That's not the truth. They're deceiving. They go beyond what Moses wanted, and they go to parts of the country where he didn't ask them to go, and they give a report that they didn't ask about. So we know that there were very few. So Caleb pushes back in verse 30. Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." And then they doubled down on their deception. They doubled down. They begin to overflate the report. Verse 28, the people who live there are powerful. The cities are fortified. They're very large. You know, Jericho, when they finally get into the land, is only about 6 acres. Listen to the report they're giving. The cities are very large. They're fortified. When I went to Dallas Seminary, I got to, when you go to a big seminary, doesn't matter who you are, you don't get to teach. Okay. They got thousands of Dallas Seminary graduates, just like Denver does, around the area. So when you come in there, it doesn't matter what you've done, you don't get to teach. So I looked around for a church, found a church, and I said, "Is there any place to teach?" "Yeah, you can teach the 4 and 5-year-olds. I'll teach the 4 and 5-year-olds. Pretty soon I had all their parents in the class. So I asked the 4 and 5-year-olds, "So you can march around Jericho 7 times in a day." "Yeah." "How big was Jericho?" "It was really big." "Is it as big as Dallas-Fort Worth?" "Oh, yeah." "Can you march around Dallas-Fort Worth in a day?" "No." "Then how do they do it?" And the children go, "Well, we don't know." And the parents are lining the walls going, "Yeah, how did they do it?" I said, "Come on, we'll go on a field trip." I had already mapped it out. So I took the kids. We all held hands, went in a line. Parents followed us. We had this long line. We walked around the perimeter of it was a mega church. I said, "That's how big Jericho was." What did they say? "The cities are huge and they're fortified. We even saw the descendants of Anak there." So Caleb tries to stop them, and they double down on their deception. Okay, it's remarkable. Verse 31. But the men who had grown up with him said, "We can't." Now that's a key, important little clue. The men who had grown up with him. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. "We can't attack those people. They're stronger than we are." They spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land that they had explored. They said, "The land we explored devours those living in it." Well, if it devours the people, how do you have so many people there? Right off the bat, you got a problem. But they go on. "All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim." We saw the Nephilim. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. The Nephilim occur in Genesis 6. They're giants. Okay? They're giants. They were destroyed in the flood. Only Noah came through the flood in his family. They didn't. They're lying. They're deceiving the people. They could not have seen the Nephilim. "We seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we look the same to them." So they have inflated, with everything we know, they've inflated the report. What happens next? Well, you're going to have to wait to find out. That's the next chapter. Okay? But here's an interesting thing. These scouts, these leaders, all grew up together. You know Caleb, you know what his name means? Dog. You see, he had experienced true freedom from slavery. And he's beginning to grasp a concept which we find in Romans 6. That freedom from slavery includes freedom from slavery to sin. In other words, we have been forgiven. We do serve the one true God. We have nothing to worry about, ever. We've talked about that on Elders many times over the years. We have nothing to worry about. Nothing. And he gets it, and the rest of them don't. You see, for all the rest of them, because they came out of slavery too, but they just didn't grasp what it was about. For the rest of them, when obstacles are in their path, chaos, entrapment, deception results. They're still slaves at heart. So you have two different perspectives here. So who are these people? You have one person who got it. Their faith was real. The rest of them disappear into anonymity. But Caleb doesn't. He reappears over and over and over again. And it's one of the examples that we see in Scripture of what true faith looks like. So the question I want to leave you with until we come back to this story, we're going to pick up chapter 12. It's a very important story on how deception invaded the leadership as well. The question I want to leave you with is, what does your faith look like? Who do you associate with? Do you connect with Caleb? You're going to stand firm no matter what. We have nothing to be afraid of. Do you really believe that? We have nothing to be afraid of. I don't really care what the town council decides. I don't really care what the state legislature decides. All these bills are before them that we hate. So what? I don't really care. We have nothing to be afraid of. That's how powerful our God is. We have the same Holy Spirit who raised Jesus from the dead. Perfect love casts out fear. Caleb got it. Well, we should go. Forget it. And everybody else is frightened. So what actually reigns in your hearts? Does God reign in your heart? Or does fear reign in your heart? It's what I asked the students in India. And they're learning not to let fear reign because their whole life they've been afraid of the gods. And they're learning and they cry and they weep with joy that we serve a God that we don't have to be afraid of. We don't have to be afraid of our God. So, what does your faith look like? Are you just like the 10? By the way, there were 12. Josh was the one. He's silent here. We'll talk about that later. Okay? So it's Caleb, Joshua, and the 10. Are you like the 10? Or are you like Caleb? It doesn't matter. Let's go for it. Another way to ask the question is, do you really believe? Do you really believe we can make a difference? Do you believe that? A lady came up to me. Sometimes I hate to use these stories because it makes it sound like I'm bragging. I'm not. I just want you to understand, the conference is all over. The last person they're all leaving the auditorium. They've packed their stuff, and I'm a little tired. I'm getting ready to go to the back room to get my briefcase and my backpack. And I hear, Dr. Howard. And I can't turn away when I hear that. Okay? It happens a few times each conference. Okay, when you hear, Dr. Howard, you're a good teacher, it's like, okay, fine. Thank you very much. And you move on. But when you hear, Dr. Howard, I turn around and there's this really just a beautiful young lady standing there. And I said, yes. And she said, a year ago, I got ready to commit suicide. I had enough. And I go, oh, okay. Oh, ouch. And her head's down and she said, my friend came over, said, come on, we're going for coffee. And she said, I got in the car and your voice came on the radio. She was listening to the podcast and she was at that part of the podcast where I get a chance to talk for my 5 to 10 minutes. And she said, and I sat there and you talked about how kind and loving God is. And she started to cry and then I started to cry. We're standing there. And she said, I just heard that a few minutes, and I thought, maybe there is a God who really is real and cares. And so that was my first time I heard it. She goes, I listen to everything that you put. I'm listening to your series in Numbers. You are? My own congregation is not doing that. Sorry. Okay? I have no control over what happens in these messages or where they go. But here's a lady getting ready, a young lady, I'm guessing early 20s, getting ready to commit suicide. And she just said, and she looked up and she just had tears running down her cheeks. She said, I just wanted to say thank you for letting God use you. And she gave me a big hug. And then I go to pack my backpack and I think, that's why I do ministry. That's it right there. How do you describe your faith? Do you belong to the 10? Or do you belong to Caleb? If somebody looked at your life, would they say, that person is a Christian because of the way they love? That's how we know. Did they say that? You get to control your own life. Father, thank you. This incredible story, Lord, you help us to see, as you do so many times, number one, how patient you are. Number two, what real faith looks like. Authentic, genuine faith is filled with love. We hear Rob talk about this and the musicians up front all the time, and it's true. The world will know us by our love, not by our words. God, help us to be that kind of church. A church where Summit County knows us because of our love. We ask these things, genuinely ask you to help us with this because we believe in your Son, Jesus. He's our high priest. Amen.